Hi there, this is a recording for cisp300 in 2018 fall semester. This is question number 3 of the final exam. Um, so this question is the first one that actually tests the knowledge of using subroutines. And let's go ahead and work this one out. All right. So the first part is really to look at the listing of the program first and try to figure out what the program is supposed to do. So from the program, you can see that the most mysterious line is on line 199 in this particular case. Oh, I forgot to make the bitmap stay on top the whole time. So let's go ahead and do that. Always on top. There we go. Okay. So the important part is line 199, and the way we read line 199 is the same way that we read, parentheses. We work ourselves from the inside out, and the most important part is the result of invoke v1 is used as the value for parameter x when we invoke v2. So that's the most important part. Okay, but once we figure out that part, the other subroutines are actually pretty simple, even though only one of them, which is v2, has one parameter x here. The other ones do not even have any parameters. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. The line number column is going to be a little bit tricky because it's going to be it needs a little bit more space than we normally do. Okay, line. It doesn't do that. It might have to do with the other window being up. Okay, let me try this one more time. Or maybe it's still, it's still using the ruler tool, that's why. Okay. So let me backspace one more time, get rid of that. All right, so now we can try again. And here we have line number. It's going to take up a little bit more space, mostly because we need to write line 199 several times. But each time we write it, we have one fewer invoke, but it will still take up some space. So we're just going to say it takes up this much space here. And I also told the class to bring a ruler, because with a ruler, then you can easily make very straight lines, and so it's easier to take care of the rest. All right, do we have any global variables? Well, the only name that we refer to is x here, but x is not a global variable. X is a parameter, so we don't really have any global variables. So as a result, the precondition really has nothing to say because we don't have any global variables. The first line that is outside of a subroutine is on line 201, and it invokes main. All right, so we look into main, and main doesn't have any local variables either. So in this case, because main does not have a return value, it is okay for us to use return line number. Okay, so we say return line number, and it's just going to be post, okay, because there's nothing else here. So once again, we use the ruler tool to draw, to make it easy to identify the column. There's no need to address each individual column in this case because we don't have anything that passes by reference. In one of the later questions, there's a pass by reference that we have to label the columns. Okay, so once we get into, once we remember where to get back to, we can now get into the main subroutine starting on line 199. So this is the first time we get to line 199, and we ask, can we finish the execution of this line in one single session? And the answer is nope, we cannot do that because it's trying to print the result of a subtraction. That's going to be the last operation, but we can't really do that yet. because we have to figure out what is the return value of invoke v3 and then invoke v2, but we can't even do that because we have to invoke v1 first. So right here we have a choice. We can either invoke v3 first or we can invoke v1 first. Okay, both will work. It doesn't really matter which one. So I'm just going to assume that we're going to read from left to right, so we're going to invoke v3 first. v3 is right here. It has no local variables, and it returns a value of 32. So now we need to track down, how to get to that, execute that subroutine. So this time we cannot use return line number. We have to use return info, because when we come back, we're going to come back to line 199 because we got a lot of unfinished business on that line. So when we get back to line 199, we're going to print, and then the question mark is replacing the invocation that we are taking care of right now, which is invoking v3. But we still have the subtraction and then the rest of this line here. Oops. So here's, oops. Okay. So here's invoke v2 and then invoke v1 and use that to specify parameter x. So that's going to be our entire return info. And let's go ahead and put a ruler here and draw a straight line. There we go. So once we set up the return info column, we can now continue execution in v3 as a subroutine. Okay. The only line that we execute here is line 196. All right, so we go to line 196, and then the only thing it does is to replace the question mark with the return value of 32. So as I said in class, we can do this notation. Okay, we can just kind of cross this out to 32. It makes it easier to look at things. And then we can also, shorthand the whole thing by indicating this is the next line that we'll execute. So we'll use an arrow and stick it here. So that means I really did not need to leave all that space with the line number column. But it's okay, for people who want to just kind of copy in the whole thing again. That makes it more clear. And then we get to, oh, okay, I take it back. I messed up here. I messed up because we replaced that, but it's not time to return yet. Okay, so we move on to the next line, which is line 197. Okay, this is where we have to say, okay, we are now deallocating the return info cell, but not before we indicate that this is what we will need to execute next. Then we deallocate the entire column. Basically say that column is no longer in use. And now we are back to line 199, but line 199 is going to look like this now. This is where, copying the text, makes it easier to read. But it's okay, because, this is one thing that I said we can do in class. So we have another invoke v1 that we have to do first, because invoke v2 requires the result of v1 to specify its parameter x. So our next thing to do is to invoke v1, and the result of doing that, I think I did 199. It should use this line to replace to deallocate the column. So I'm gonna use the eraser and get rid of this line here because I don't need that. Okay, there we go. So we're gonna have to reset up the return info cell right here. And when we are done with invoking v1, we're going to go back to line 199 again. We still have something to print. The 32 is already known. We still need to perform the subtraction. We still have to invoke, I'll keep misspelling invoke, and we still have to invoke v2. But whatever v1 is returning is going to specify parameter x when we invoke v2. So this is the new return info cell. After we set up the return info cell, we can now proceed to get to v1. v1 is returning a value of 6 on line 187. So we get to line 187, and we are just going to replace the question mark with the value that we are returning, which is 6 in this case. And that's it. Line 187 only has this much to do. And then we move on to line 188, where we return. So this time I'm going to get it right. We take this return info cell, and we say this is what we're going to do next. And then on line 188, we deallocate the return info cell because it is no longer in use at this point. So let me scroll this down a little bit. Okay. So now we're back to line 199, and this is what it looks like at this point. We still cannot perform the subtraction because the invocation of v2 is not done yet. So that's what we're going to do next, is to invoke v2. So doing that requires return info cell again. So we are reallocating this column as return info cell. And when we're done with this subroutine call to v2, we're going to get back to line 199 because we still got stuff to do. We still have to print, and we still have the subtraction to do. But the entire invocation of v2 is now replaced by a single question mark as a placeholder for the return value. Once that is done, we also need to remember to set up parameter x, because v2 is the only one that has a parameter x here. And just to make it easier to read, when we're going to use more lines and more columns, there we go. So what do we use as the value of parameter x? Well, since we're executing this part here, 6 is being used for parameter x. There we go. So once we set up the columns, we can now get into subroutine v2. Subroutine v2 is right here. The first line that actually does anything useful is line 192. So we now continue execution on line 192, where it returns x minus 13. X is 6. 6 minus 13 is negative 7. So we replace the question mark with negative 7. Okay, and we'll put it in parentheses so that it doesn't mess up the outer subtraction operator. And then we move on to line 193, where we copy and paste the entire return info cell to the next row, and then we use a bar to indicate that this column is no longer in use. So we just try out 2 columns this time because it's not just a return info cell. Parameter x is also deallocated in this process. So now we get back to line 199 again, and this time it is just saying print 32 minus negative 7 in this particular variation. I forgot to put a column for comments, and as it turns out, it's not too late to do that. So I'm going to cheat a little bit here and carve out a new column right here. And this is going to be my comments column. So when we get back to line 199, then we're going to say print. Okay, I'm going to use a different color just to make it obvious what is the result of executing line 199 at this point. So we are just going to be printing 32 minus -7, which is the same thing as 32 plus 7, which is 39. Okay, and then we're done with this part. And then we move on to line 200 finally. Line 200 is an defined sub, so we have to look up the rightmost return line number or return info cell. That's going to be this return line number column here, which tells us that we have to continue execution at post. And then the next thing we do is to deallocate that column. And then we end up at post, which means we are all done. So this is the entire trace of question number 3 of the final exam. And let me point out, what kind of important stuff, I'll be looking for. So what I'll be looking for is whether people understand the statement of line 199. Basically, the important part is to, I'm going to use a different color here. So the first thing we need to do is to either do this or do this. Okay, so there's a choice. Okay, so I'll call this step 1A and step 1B. Step 1A and 1B, people can choose one or the other. It doesn't matter which one first. But step 2 is the invocation of V2. That has to be done as the second thing. And then the third thing, when we get back to line 199, is to perform the actual print and also combining that with the subtraction operator. So this entire thing is step 3. So the sequencing is important. That's one thing that I'll be looking for. The second thing, the other part that is also important, is how we set up return line number versus return info cell, how the question mark is used to replace the invocation of the subroutine that we are in at the point, and also how the return statement is replacing the question mark with the value that is being returned. And then on the line that says n defined sub, we also, which is line 197 here, two things are important. The first one is we basically need a way to make sure that I can see, what is that line going to become when we get back and execute that line. That's one. And then the second one is the deallocation of the columns. So all of those things are the ones that I'll be looking for. Is an indication that the answer has to indicate an understanding of the concepts involved and also the ability to apply those concepts. All right, so this is it for question number 3, and I will continue to post more videos as I get to the other questions.